First, thank you for the invitation for this important gathering. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Ephraim. My PhD instructor is sitting there, Gabi Bendo. Thank you as well. On a personal note, someone is missing here today, a very important scholar of the Gulf, a very dear friend of myself, and Josh, Joseph Yossi Kostiner, who many of you know. I miss you, Yossi. We all miss you. I wish you were here. Signed in Vienna on the 14th of July, 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the deal with Iran, the agreement with Iran, poses a question of whether other countries in the region and in the Arabian Peninsula will insist upon equivalent nuclear rights that Iran has received in this agreement. Even before the deal was signed, several Middle East states have begun developing civilian nuclear infrastructure. The UAE has 4 reactors already under construction, and it's expected to be the first Arab country to use nuclear energy in its territory. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, KSA too, has sent out feelers to outside companies for the purpose of developing civilian nuclear energy and has started building up technological and scientific infrastructure required for that. Yeah, it's working. There is a real concern that this project could serve as a springboard for future development of military programs. This concern is amplified by the fact that some of these states refused thus far to waive their right to develop a nuclear fuel cycle capabilities, mainly enriching uranium and separating plutonium. Given the technical complexity and the tremendous resources required to jumpstarting a nuclear program, it is not all clear if some of the candidates will be able to realize their nuclear plans, some of which are very ambitious indeed. At the same time, the concern about a possible future transition from a civilian to military capabilities requires our very close monitoring. You can see here on the picture the expected the building of the Balaka 4 reactors near the Saudi border, and the UAE, of course, be expected to be operable as early as late 2017. In 2009, the US Congress declared the 123 agreement with the UAE to be the gold standard, a model for future nuclear cooperations. The US, it's been said, will only cooperate with those states willing to limit their fuel cycle activities. However, after the deal signed with Iran, other states are liable to begin developing their own programs without the self-imposed limits assumed by the UAE. KSA and Jordan, for example, refuses thus far to sign a 123 agreement. The fact is that the gold standard has been eroded. And it's been eroded not just by the Iranian president, but also by US case-by-case approach, as illustrated in the agreements Washington signed with Vietnam and Korea recently, granting Hanoi and Seoul considerable latitude for domestic fuel cycle activities. Given the intensity of competition talked before between Iran and KSA, it is likely that Riyadh will seek to match Iran's capabilities by procuring their own nuclear know-how. While the deal with Iran will not lead KSA to immediately launch a full nuclear military program, it may cause the kingdom to accelerate its nuclear hedging strategy. And what I mean by hedging strategy, building up nuclear infrastructures to keep future options open. The Saudis think that the deal with Iran buys them more or less a decade in which they can invest in the nuclear realm without breaking up their non-proliferation commitments. In 2011, KSA announced its ambitious plan to build no fewer than 60 nuclear power plants and an estimated cost of over $100 billion. But for that, they need the price of oil to go up. They can't afford it right now. One of the concerns associated with such civilian program is that they could serve as a basic for development of military program should political circumstances, threat perceptions, and allies' commitments change. So what do the Saudis want? You see some of the examples of the rhetoric in the last few years. In a series of unprecedented statements on the nuclear question since 2010, the Saudis elite declared its willingness to at least consider the nuclear road. KSA signed safeguard agreements with the IAEA, but in doing so, it signed, and this is despite US request not to do so, an earlier version of the Small Quantities Protocol, the SQP, which limits the scope of IAEA inspections, and it has yet to accept the modified SQP adopted by the IAEA. In addition, KSA has not yet signed the additional protocol, which allows for stricter inspections, nor it has signed the CTBT, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Thus, it can be argued that KSA has potentially left the door open for its pursuit of further nuclear development in the future. Nuclear energy is very attractive for KSA for several reasons. More than 70% of the kingdom's drinking water comes from the desalinated water, seawater, and using nuclear energy for fueling desalination is less expensive in the long run than using oil. Furthermore, KSA has regularly issues information regarding its increasing need for energy, probably as a means of justifying its nuclear development and emphasizing its non-military characteristics. The desire for alternate sources of energy as a means of protecting the kingdom's oil and preserving it for export, and the contribution of such technological achievement can bring to countries prestige and identity cannot be overlooked. It also has a security rationale. Despite its wealth and status, KSA operates out of a deep sense of vulnerability. In Riyadh's view, a nuclear-capable Iran could dictate the Gulf agenda, including oil markets, as well as incite the Shiite in the kingdom Eastern Province and elsewhere in the Gulf, undermining the kingdom's status in the Muslim world, as well as the royal family grip on power. So what can be done? Those most vocal, claiming that they will go nuclear, like Saudi Arabia and others, depend heavily on the US for their security, providing the US with a significant leverage over them. However, given the erosion of trust between some of the regional players and the US, a few of them are liable to seek to mitigate risk by forming alliances, informal or informal, with other countries in order to improve their security. While the Gulf monarchs fear an American strategic pivot in accordance with the administration declaration that East Asia heads the American list of priorities, their greatest fear is actually concerning an American pivot towards Iran. Based on its history, including the clandestine acquisition of the CSS-2, if you remember, in the late 80s, of Chinese missiles, and perhaps in later stage as well, more recently, the CSS-5 and other missiles perhaps, the financial assistance extended to Pakistan for its nuclear program and the special relations with Islamabad, I think KSA nuclear conduct deserves better scrutiny. In the case of an Iranian breakout, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, I don't think the Saudis will wait long. More than any other Middle East country, KSA is the ideological and strategic motive for obtaining nuclear might, and also possesses the economic ability to do so. Already in 2008, a US congressional report on this topic pointed out, and I quote, "The kingdom will not hesitate to aggressively bypass or risk alienating the US in order to protect its interest. Despite the Fukushima disaster that turned many nations away from nuclear technology altogether, the attractiveness of nuclear program in the Middle East has remained steady due to energy-related issues, matters of prestige and identity, and of course serious concerns regarding Iran. The region, therefore, remains a proliferation risk. The fact is that it will be very difficult to discourage other countries from pursuing the same capabilities that Washington has accepted in Iran. Put this together with the strained relations with the US, and you get a recipe for uncontrolled proliferation. One of the results of that distancing from Washington is that the Gulf states are looking more and more eastward. The GCC states seek a greater role for China in the region and think about their relations with China more and more in strategic terms, not just economic terms. Another development worth mentioning is that many in the West are changing their attitudes towards the kingdom. As the price of oil is falling, many are questioning the alliance with Riyadh and criticizing the kingdom more freely for its human rights record, ideology, and regional adventures. Some see the alliance with Riyadh as a burden, not as an asset, and the kingdom as a source of instability. And it's not just the Chinese. Russian dominance in the financing and building of the first nuclear power reactors in Turkey, in Jordan, and now in Egypt is apparent, as well as extensive Russian-Saudi cooperation on the nuclear ventures. In April 2016, Rosatom has announced it is opening a regional office in Dubai. I hope you can see the cartoons. Although the biggest concern about civilian nuclear infrastructures, especially in the Middle East, has to do with their potential as springboards for military nuclear program. An important restraint factor is the relationship of the nations under discussions with the US. Traditional US policy has been to oppose, firstly, nuclear proliferation in general, and nuclear proliferation in the Middle East in particular. In a study I published just a week ago with Dr. Gaila Lindenstrauss from my institute, we argue that as long as Gulf security depends on US presence, it is probable that none of these states will engage in a move that will anger Washington to the point of threatening bilateral relations. However, in this sense, I think KSA is somewhat of an exception. At this point, none of the region's nations is showing any signs of wanting to compete with Iran's military nuclear program. But several states have made it clear that at least at the technological and scientific level, they are not have any attention to being left behind. Even if the neighbors will not go all the way in the nuclear path, jump-starting nuclear program might unleash destabilizing processes in the region. I'm willing to bet, and I'm not a gambler, that Riyadh will seek to match Iran's nuclear capabilities some way or another. However, more of the agreements with Iran, technical significance, the kingdom's fears US-Iranian rapprochement, and the implications of Iran's new status in the region. President Obama is now perceived in many places in the Gulf as essentially pro-Shia, giving Iran the keys to the region. GCC states have expressed concern that the US may entirely abandon the security for energy partnership with them as Iran slowly comes out of the Gulf. To conclude, the nuclear agreement with Iran may set a new and worrisome nuclear standard in the region. If the Iranians are permitted to enrich uranium domestically, other regional actors might very well take take this as a benchmark for their own rights, resulting in a cascade of threshold nuclear states. Beyond the concern about transitioning from civilian to military nuclear projects, there are fears about the safety and security of the facilities under constructions. In light of the agreement with Iran that granted Iran an industrialized size nuclear program, I understand that the UAE already might reconsider its nuclear compact. We might wake up a decade from now, maybe more, and find a cascade of threshold states in the region. KSA doesn't yet have the technological capabilities to independently develop a civilian nuclear program, let alone a military one. It remains publicly committed to the peaceful pursuit of nuclear technology, particularly as a means of assisting its energy production, and repeatedly emphasized the necessity of a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East. None of these factors, however, guarantee that, in the face of increasing security threats connected to Iran, KSA would not attempt to shift its future civilian program to a military one, or attempt to acquire nuclear weapons for somewhere else as a means of deterrence. The agreement with Iran will not end the Saudi nuclear option. It may even accelerate it. It seems that the cat is out of the bag, or the genie is out of the bottle. Each one of you choose your own cliche for a slow motion Middle East nuclear arms race. Thank you.